Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, another week, another day, another chapter. Just a quick warning, I might sound a bit rough this week. I might have sounded a bit rough last week. It's because it's spring here, and sinusitis is a thing. So, yay. But ever onwards. Don't forget to like if you want to see more, and the other usual stuff. I would just like to give a very big thank you to my Tier 5 channel members and patrons. Bob the Dragon, Data Magnet, Cat Crab Lobster, Duck Machine, Try Again 95, Estrella the Dreamer, Mesic, Fudic Joel, German Chemist, and Casper Arnholtz. Thank you again very much. But anyways, on to the story. The Care and Feeding of Humans, Part 2. Hiring Humans. Humans do not thrive in solitary conditions. They are pack animals and need a pack around them. It is therefore recommended that you hire humans in group of 3 or more. When reproducing, they need both sets of their binary reproduction system, but their sex does not play into the makeup of the work group dynamic. Unlike the trolls, for example, where the group needs to be a matched set of 9, 3 mating groups. An expedition group of humans can all be male or female, or any mix of those. While humans consider themselves to be sexually dimorphic, males are hairier and bigger than females. In actual practice, it is impossible for anyone, even humans themselves, to determine a sex of a given human by pure observation. Human sexual dimorphism is above 15% as a species, approaching 0.01% in an individual comparisons. In contrast, trolls are 97% sexually dimorphic, so that they are not even regarded as the same species when they were first encountered. Diebeck Review of the Ontological Species Studies, The Care and Feeding of Humans, Hiring Humans, The Perfect Mix, published by the Glass and Steel, The Care and Feeding of Humans, Translation Engine 3.14159. Nerif waited in the hold for the damaged human female to show up. How would she shake hands if the human was missing a right arm? Nerif thought back to the handshake with Alan and Nate. She would just hold out both hands and let Zoe pick which one she wanted to shake. Time passed, and while Zoe was not in danger of being late, Nerif would certainly agree that her arrival was delayed. Maybe Zoe had stopped on the way to the ship to get a pet. All the literature agreed that humans needed companion animals. In fact, the book, The Care and Feeding of Humans, specifically said that if humans were not allowed to bring their own animals with them, they were quite likely to adopt something that they find on the expedition. Usually, this would be announced by the human ritual of saying, "Look what followed me home. Can we keep him?" This was phrased as a question, but the book had cited several expedition failures when the response had been no, and strongly suggested that the question was something humans call rhetorical, which meant no response was expected. She wondered with some trepidation if Zoe would pick a smaller but the more unpredictably lethal predator known as a cat, or would she pick a larger predator known as dog, or something else. Humans were notorious in the wide range of animals that they considered pets. Would she be expected to touch the predator? Nerif shivered. Just as her imagination started to really pick up steam about what kind and how many predators Zoe might bring aboard, a human stepped on the deck, a bag tracking along behind her. It was definitely a her. While the Care and Feeding of Humans had said that the sexual dimorphism between humans was less than 15% across the species, Nerif had no problem seeing the differences that marked Zoe as female. Her coloration was also much darker than either Nate or Alan, but not related to sexual dimorphism. She was also very tall for a human, coming in at almost Nerif's shoulder. However, Nerif blinked. When she'd ordered Zoe from the catalog, it had definitely said that she was missing an arm. This human female had both arms. Had she already regrown her arm? Nerif, I'm sorry I'm a little late, she smiled. It didn't touch her eyes, which were so dark that they were almost black, and held out her right hand. Nerif blinked. You are not late for check-in, but I'm afraid there may not be as much time for your tour of the ship before we take off. Nareth shook Zoe's hand. Your pardon, but, you've already regrown your arm? Zoe frowned a little. What? You are a valuable human with many valuable skills and a proven history to use those skills. Quite frankly, the only reason this expedition was able to afford 3 humans, one with your skill set, was because you were damaged and missing an arm, but... Nareth looked down and gestured at the 2 hands that she could see. Ah! Zoe paused a moment, her face showing nothing that Nareth could see as an expression. The care and feeding of humans had said that reading human facial expressions was a skill that would take many years, but that sometimes no visible expression meant the human had been emotionally wounded by the conversation. I'm sorry, Nareth stated. I did not mean to offend. I'm not offended, Zoe cut her off with a gesture. No, I have not regrown my arm. This is a prosthetic, see? She slid back a sleeve of her jacket, and there was a silver arm cuff just below the elbow, encircling Zoe's arm. There's the joint, and at least made to look like jewelry, but it's still just a prosthetic. Amazing. Nareth bent over the arm. I've read that humans have a long history of creating artificial limbs when your limbs are severed. Yeah, well, Zoe pushed the sleeve back down, ending Nareth's inspection. I guess we do have a long history of that. Your people don't, right? Nareth stepped back and shook her head, proud that she had this human gesture down. No, well, it might have been valuable in some instances. If we lost a limb, we would not live long enough for a prosthetic to help us. Zoe's face went blank again, and Nareth hesitated, not sure how she had offended. True, Zoe said, and then straightened herself a little. Anyway, regrowing an arm isn't expensive, which is why I agreed to this expedition. Even after swearing, she stopped herself, lips pressed together, and then she switched topics. If you could please have someone show me to my quarters. Of course, I'll take you there myself, Nareth said. No need. I assumed that you are busy before pre-flight, Zoe said. I am the liaison officer, Nareth said, with some pride. It is my job and my pleasure to make sure that you 3 are very comfortable on this trip. If you'll follow me. Nareth turned and headed down the same corridor that the droid had earlier let Alan and Nate down. Zoe took 2 long steps to catch up and walked beside Nareth, her luggage obediently trundling along behind her. So, there are 3 of us. Nareth nodded proudly. I was able to argue for a budget big enough for 3, so that you would not suffer from lack of human companionship on the trip or expedition. Peachy, Zoe muttered. Who are the other 2? They are male humans, Alan and Nate. They are already in their quarters, so you can meet them soon. Oh, and I have navigation bracelets for all 3 of you. Nareth paused in front of the door and pressed the button. She then gestured to Zoe. Come, let the door scan you. Once you are scanned, you'll have private access to your quarters, except in case of emergencies. Zoe nodded, not even a false smile on her face. It's not my first rodeo. Not my first rodeo? Oh, a cowboy expression, meaning you've done this many times before. Nate also used a cowboy expression today. Are space cowboys common? Nate and Alan are space cowboys, Zoe asked. Her voice sounded different, and Nareth hesitated again. Humans were a mix of scary strong, dangerous, and fragile, and this very expensive human was already damaged. She didn't want to make things worse, so decided that honesty was the best thing that might help the most. I'm not sure, Nareth said. She mentally reviewed the conversation that she'd had with the males. Alan seemed to think not, she added. Are space cowboys a bad thing? Zoe snorted, and Nareth immediately decided that she would practice that sound in her quarters tonight, perhaps in the rejuvenation area, where no one else would hear her, until she got it right. Zoe seemed to relax after the snort, and finish coding her room. When the door released, Zoe walked in and motioned her luggage to the corner near the bed. She looked around the room. Not as nice as the hospital where she spent the last couple months, but much nicer than the crew quarters that she'd ever had before. The colors were in blues and greens, with hints of purple that reminded her of Nareth's coloring. The textures were rich and inviting, from the bedside table that seemed carved from driftwood to the rich, nubbly blue throw that covered the bed. She looked up and noticed Nareth was watching her intently. "If something's not to your liking," Nareth started to say, and Zoe waved her off and smiled. The smile, Nareth noticed, went all the way to Zoe's eyes. She had won her first smile from the female. "Oh, this is great," Zoe said softly. "Did you decorate it, or do all quarters look like this?" Nareth's normal night blue coloring shifted slightly to purple. Zoe was fascinated. It was like watching someone underwater with waves of soft color flowing over her. "Well," Nareth said, "all the quarters have a bed and one kind or another and a table. But I read in a catalog that you like to read and that your favorite colors are blues and greens, so, She trailed off. Zoe's eyes seemed wetter than normal. Nareth couldn't see actual water coming out of them, so Zoe wasn't crying, but Nareth mentally flailed around helplessly. The carrot feeding of humans had never mentioned wet eyes. Zoe turned away from Nareth abruptly and stripped off her jacket, taking care to load it into the closet. When she turned back to Nareth, her eyes were no longer wet. "Ah," Nareth thought, "it was sweat. She was hot and took off her jacket, and now she's no longer sweating." "You are familiar with how to adjust the climate controls of your quarters?" Nareth asked, when Zoe nodded. Nareth felt a flush of relief. While the temperature did not seem excessive hot to her, it was good to know that Zoe could adjust to match her needs. "Oh, your navigation bracelet." Nareth put one slender hand in her pocket and pulled out the bracelet at a dial. "I don't think anything is scheduled before departure. We will have a meeting in the common room for the last meal and briefing updates." Zoe nodded. "Thank you." "I'll give time to unpack," Nareth said, "unless you want the tour of the ship now." No, thank you." Zoe added the last part as almost an afterthought. "Maybe later?" Nareth nodded gravely. "Until later, then." She left Zoe's room, and once the door closed behind her, tapped her own navigation bracelet for the quarters of Alan and Nate. She'd been so excited to perform the handshakes that she'd forgotten to give them their bracelets. End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope